My name is Jacob. As you already know, I'm that weird guy that likes to hang out in a cemetery. I take appreciation into whoever I'm working with, and I don't always call them a stone, it's a person, and they're just represented by a stone. And coincidentally, at Smoketown Cemetery, there's a lot of children, so it's sometimes hard to go home and look at my own children when I've just helped a grave of a 1-month-old or 2-month-old or a couple-year-old, so that's kind of hard. But I also like to work with the veterans because I'm a very patriotic human being, and working with a veteran headstone is incredible. And when I go to cemeteries, whether it's Smoketown Cemetery or any of the ones in our area, I'm not always beelining straight towards a military headstone, which a lot of us know what those look like. The uprights, see a lot of them at Arlington, or even the flat headstones you might see at the Gap. But the farther back in history you go, you won't see a lot of those. They exist, but you won't see a lot of them because most of the time they didn't have those, and they're just a family headstone. So you could pass by 50 stones on your way to go see somebody, and you just passed 20 veterans because they didn't have that kind of stone then. So a lot of times you might get like a GAR marker, which is Grand Army of the Republic, or the current Sons of Union Veterans of the Civil War. They do the same thing with the GAR logo. And those are where your flag holders would be. I always like to keep in mind whoever I'm walking past could be someone important, but I also think everybody's important. Also planned really nice note cards. I'm just ignoring all of it. But anyway, so York County had a lot of volunteerism during the Civil War. Also enlisted and conscripted, but a lot of volunteerism. And these were just everyday people. They were farmers, they were tradesmen, they were sons, brothers, you know. Some of them were that young, they were drummers. And one of them, I'm missing on his name, but he rose up the rank just as a drummer, which was pretty cool. And you hear a lot of, military talk, and sometimes it gets a little mundane, a lot of fighting, a lot of explosions, a lot of death. That's what some of this is going to be, so I'm sorry if I'm going to bore you a little bit. But I chose a couple to talk about because you hear about the famous cases of someone who gets their leg amputated, their arm amputated. Those cases happened here. They happened right here in York County. They happened right here in Newberry Town. So don't think that, sure, we all know that happened to a lot of people, but they also happened to our neighbors. There's Nebinger's Family Cemetery in Lewisberry. So if you go in and you turn right, it's up in a little farmer's field, and it has a beautiful, really old white iron gate, or iron fence. I actually went to that cemetery last year, and it was this high, overgrown. And on Christmas Eve, picking my wife off, I was out there with a weed whacker, and I mowed the whole thing down. Why was I there on Christmas Eve? I was taking flags and wreaths around Christmas time, because I do my own little mini wreaths across America. In that cemetery, there are a few veterans from the Civil War, and one of them is William R. Miller. He actually had his arm shot in the Battle of Spotsylvania, and he was an amputee. He survived the war, came home, but he's an example of someone who survived the war and managed to come home. Others not so lucky. Yoakum Town Square, if you know where that is. If you turn left, there's the old Church of God Cemetery right there. They since have relocated their church, but they still have that cemetery. There's several veterans there. 2 of them were brothers. One was named Adam, the other one was Lyman Brubaker, and no one's even sure if they're buried there. Adam, he survived the war, but he moved to Kansas, and that's where he died, so they're not even sure if he got shipped home to Pennsylvania or not. The other was Lyman. He was shot with an artillery shell in the leg and presumably died there on the battlefield. And they have a very large unknown section at the site, and that's where a lot of people are buried, so it's presumed he's there. But I'm assuming the family erected this very large monument. It's about this tall, and on 4 sides, at least 2 of them, are their names. Another cemetery I take flags and wreaths to. Nice little cemetery. One day I saw a bunch of chickens and goats walking around. So. At Smoketown Cemetery, as you mentioned, there are several. There's actually a War of 1812 veteran that did not have his stone known for a while. I found his stone one day, and I actually made a really loud screech when I was there. And people were like, "What's going on in that cemetery?" That was me. But there were 2 Civil War soldiers there that passed away. They were fatalities in the war. One was at the Third Battle of Winchester, which almost 10,000 deaths at that battle. Is a Private Harvey Fowles. Not much known about him from the Manchester area, they presume. He volunteered when he was young, served his entire time, and then re-enlisted as a veteran volunteer. And it wasn't much after that re-enlistment that he was wounded at that battle and died a few days after. And no one really knows much about his family, but they must have been from the area because he was brought home to Smoketown, which this is that cemetery that you had mentioned that I'm restoring. The other one was William Henry Wise. He was a young man who had just gotten married. He had lost a daughter in 1863 and then enlisted in the war, which is probably a lot for his wife to have dealt with, but sometimes the war calls you. He then got killed at the Battle of Fort Stedman. So his wife had to now deal with no children and no husband. She then remarried, and when she died, she actually wanted to be buried next to her first husband. In York Haven, there was a gentleman named Jacob Kaler. He survived the war, but when he was at the Battle of Antietam, he contracted dysentery, enough to kill a normal human being. He somehow survived and managed to deal with it, but the conditions lasted, and he eventually died in 1877. And his wife also then remarried. But you find out a bunch of random little things that I just threw in here. The one thing I want to add, though, there had to be some kind of camaraderie amongst the men. Whether they knew each other prior to the war or not, a lot of them served in very similar units and were obviously from the same area. So a lot of them being farmers, you would assume their fields were next to one another and their farms were next to one another. Oh yeah, I have more slides, I'm sorry. There was a lot from Company B of the 200th BA Infantry, and there was a lot from Company K of the 192nd. And after the war, they had to have known each other. There were some reunions, there were some meetings where they at least all got together. So it makes you want to transport yourself back in time and be at those reunions or be at those meetings where they all getting together for dinner at some night and just being like, hey, remember that battle we were all in? Yeah, that was crazy. That's where my mind goes. I just would love to know, you can tell I don't present a lot. I would just love to know, like, their conversations. Obviously, it wasn't a fun situation to be in, but they did it. So there had to be some kind of some belonging with one another. And in our area, there are at least 181 Union veterans, and I believe, 98 at Paddletown Cemetery alone. And just my kind of conclusion was kind of how do I go about honoring these people? Kind of already said that. I repair tombstones. This one on the right, this used to be completely black, like as black as the frame of this, and it's now white. So this is one I've cleaned up and straightened. And it's just a little thing that I can do, taking wreaths, taking flags, but it makes me feel really good knowing that this person's memory and that person's memory and all of their memories aren't forgotten. And he, William Henry Wise, he was actually the one who the old Goldsboro GAR was named after. They used to name him after that. So that's about it. That's all I got.